More details on DNA evidence revealed at the Senzo Mahiwa murder trial as forensic expert Mamshedi Masekela wrapped his testimony. The SA Medical Association is concerned about individuals masquerading as healthcare professionals, and the shelling of Gaza continued overnight as Israeli troops retaliate to the Hamas attack on the weekend. I'm Daniela van Heerden, and this is The Day That Was. Forensic expert Mamshedi Masekela continued providing more detail on DNA evidence collected on the night Senzo Mahiwa was murdered. Masekela says DNA evidence collected from the infamous hat left at the murder scene doesn't match any of the suspects. Senior reporter Sindelo Masakane has been tracking this story.
We then saw the state attempting to then call its next witness, which was going to be a cell phone data expert who was going to, of course, then give testimony with regards to downloads from phones that allegedly belong to accused number 5 as well as accused number 2. Now, that particular evidence was then opposed by the defense, saying that at this stage, the complete downloads from those phones have not been received by the defense, and it said that it would prejudice the accused as well as their right to a fair trial to have the testimony of the cell phone data expert heard without the defense having proper time to consult on these downloads and preparing an adequate defense for their clients. So the defense then opposed this, and this was allowed by the judge. Let's take a listen to some of what was said by some of the lawyers during court proceedings when they did object to the evidence of the cell phone data expert.
It's 3 years now, but cell phone records are not yet ready, my lord. Now, the problem that we have with this kind of an approach is that each time we put a version to the witnesses that the states are calling, they come up with something new. Then come the next witness, we are also expected to put a different version from the first version that we would have put to the witness, on the basis of which we couched our defense based on the information that would have been available then. This prejudices the accused person's defense in their case, because at the end of it all, we are going to argue about the credibility and the honesty and the reliability of what these witnesses are saying.
Fears of a ground assault are rife as Israel retaliates against Saturday's attack by Palestinian group Hamas. The number of Israeli soldiers on the border with Palestine continues to rise, and the Israel Defense Force says it has killed about 1,500 Hamas militants and 500 civilians. ENCA anchor Masego Rahlaga spoke to our correspondent Sarah Coates for the latest from Tel Aviv.
Is it true that it's only the Israeli airlines that currently have not cancelled their flights?
Well, look, we do know that it is extremely hard to get in and out. Even when I flew over here a couple of days ago from Paris, it took me around 48 hours for what should have been a 4-hour flight. I've got a colleague trying to get in who simply cannot. So, look, it is a number of airlines that have decided to stop flights. There's just so much fear and panic about what is going on here on the ground. Even after I arrived yesterday, there were rockets over Ben Gurion International Airport, which is only mere kilometres from where we're standing now. You know, there's real fear that a ground operation could really heat things up in the coming hours. Military analysts are predicting that that is what will happen, just given the amount of troops, Israeli troops amassing there on the Gaza border. Israel has seen the biggest IDF call-up in its history. More than 300,000 reservists have now been called up to serve the country, really in the wake of this unprecedented attack, which took place on Saturday, now being day 4 of this conflict. Now, Hamas has just come out to speak about this hostage situation, saying that there will be no prisoner swap until after the war ends. And look, no one knows when that will happen. This is obviously an extremely concerning time for these families. Many families arriving here in Israel knowing that their loved ones have been taken captive in Gaza and are being held. No one knows where they are or their situation. So there, of course, is a lot of torment, a lot of fear here on the ground, just with the fact that people do not know where anyone is.
Now, global markets have been trading in positive territory despite the deepening conflict in the Middle East, but the risks remain, and higher inflation caused by higher crude prices could prompt a change in the central bank's tone. ENCA business anchor Rofiwa Matsena had this discussion with Dion Gous, Chief Investment Officer at Credo.
But what of the conflict? Have we seen a little bit of concern there?
Yes, thank you. It's nice to be chatting. I think in a nutshell, it's fair to say that the market's reaction since yesterday morning when markets opened across the world has been fairly muted. Whether that's a surprise or not, you'd have to look at historical analogies. In general, when these kind of events happen, and one might argue this is worse than many that we've seen before, and I think that would certainly be valid. But typically the market takes its time to work through some of the consequences, and frankly, from a market's point of view, the consensus quite often is that many aspects of the market may not be that much affected, depending on further developments in the coming days and weeks. So certain sectors specifically, of course, are very much affected. You've already highlighted two in the last couple of minutes. One is the oil sector, the other one is the airline sector. You mentioned earlier there that oil prices have been going up at something like 4%. Most of that move happened at the open yesterday. So today it's fairly flat. Yesterday it was up more than 3%. So that has an impact, obviously, on the oil price because people are looking at potential scarcity, potentially Iran, getting involved in the war, and all the consequences from that. On the one side, when it comes to airlines, not all these airlines are listed, but if you look at listed airline stocks, they were down to the extent of 3 or 4% yesterday as well.
The Census 2022 results have been released. The country's population has risen from 50.8 million in 2011 to 60.02 million during last year's count. The data plays a key role in government's policymaking. NCA reporter Moloko Moloto has the latest.
So this is an indication that more and more South Africans are increasing. But let's break it down in terms of the demographics. 50.5 million people in this country as of 2022 are black South Africans, which is an 81.4%. And following them is about 5.1 million colored South Africans at 8.1%, and 4.5 million white South Africans at 7.3%, and 1.7 million Indians or Asians at 0.2%. And one thing that was highlighted as interesting by statistician General Sally was that there has been a steady decline in terms of the number of white South Africans. He says that in the previous census of 2011, they were at about 9% and they have gone down to 7.3%. He really did not attribute this to anything, but during a closed session when the officials from Statistics South Africa were briefing us, of course, they did not necessarily give us the definitive reasons as to why the number of white South Africans was declining, but they mentioned possibility that the fertility rate among white South Africans could possibly be declining, but also that it could be that white South Africans are leaving South Africa. It would be interesting if we were to get the comment from Statistician General and also from government there.
And after the break, we look at some of the most talked about anchor interviews featured on ENCA during the day that was. Welcome back to The Day That Was. I'm Daniela van Heerden. Now, the DA is calling for an investigation into National Assembly Speaker Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula. And this follows reports that Parliament Secretary Olile George's salary was increased by a whopping 70%. It's alleged that George received the increase just 7 months into the job. ENCA anchor Gareth Edwards spoke to DA Chief Whip Siviwe Ugarube for her take on this.
It's quite a jump. I would like to know what that performance appraisal looked like.
Yeah, good morning, Gareth, and good morning to your viewers. Look, our view is that is not performance related. Our view and our suspicion is that, in fact, from the very beginning, the Speaker, the Executive Authority, so the Speaker and the NCOP Chair, probably misled Parliament by insisting that the incumbent would be paid 2.6 million rand. Because if one looks at the documents that have now been made public, you will then see that, in fact, while Parliament had appointed Mr. George in June of 2022, in October of 2022, already the salary review that they proclaim started and in fact was then backdated. And so instead of being paid 2.6 million rand, the Secretary to Parliament is being paid 4.4 million rand. And if one looks at the statement that that Parliament released late last night, there's been no essentially any denial that that is in fact the case. What they're simply saying is that this is routine and that this is in line with market-related sort of practices. But the reality here, Gareth, is that we were at pains as political parties in Parliament to say, we know that the Secretary of Parliament had been at Salga, where he had been paid in excess of 5 million rand. If he is coming to Parliament, it better then be within what Parliament is able to afford, which is 2.6 million rand. And the Speaker unequivocally committed to the House, to members of Parliament, and in effect, an extension to the public, that was the salary that was offered to the Secretary. And now we are realizing that, in fact, we were duped in Parliament by the Speaker, because the review was then done 3 months after his appointment and has been backdated to when he began work.
Well, fake doctors are back in the news following the exposure of social media personality Matthew Lani. Gauteng Health has laid a criminal complaint against the man who claimed on social media to be working at Helen Joseph Hospital. In the last 3 years, over 120 people were arrested for pretending to be registered doctors. ENCA anchor Tommy Ngubeni spoke to SA Medical Association Chair Muyisi Mzukwa.
So talk to us first about this. I mean, yes, they say that most of the quote-unquote fake doctors are found in the private sector. But according to what we've seen, Matthew Lani actually appeared on an X tweet by the Gauteng government, and they called him a medical intern. Apparently, there are some who say that they've seen him in the hallways of Helen Joseph, as well as Chris Hani Baragwanath's hospital. So where do you find the fake doctors? Private sector? Public sector? Everywhere? Who are they?
Good morning to you, Tammy, and to Gareth and to your listeners. This is a serious concern from the South African Medical Association. If we look at the, developments around the issue of bogus doctors. But like you said, these mostly were, I think our focus was in the private sector. HPCSA was focusing on that side of the world. But we have noted, like you said, we have noted that there are bogus doctors in the public sector as well. And at times they find themselves, acquiring higher positions, even in the system. So we do think that, the focus should not only be one-sided, it should be both the private sector and the public sector. And especially in those areas that are in the periphery, in terms of rural areas and stuff like that. But we know now also that in the urban areas, in the big hospitals, they could be a hiding place for bogus doctors.
So what type of vetting processes are there, Dr. Mzukwa, if a young man like Lani can actually be posted by Gauteng Health and they call him a medical intern? How does that happen?
I think we all need to be very vigilant and not be overtaken by the hype of the social media in all our spheres. I do think that officials in the Department of Health should have consulted first with the HPCSA to verify the registration of that medical doctor, if it was a medical doctor. I think that's the first step. Whoever employs a person or interacts with the person who's supposed to be a medical doctor, the first step is to approach HPCSA and make a verification.
Oscar Pistorius has been eligible for parole for the past 6 months, according to the Constitutional Court. Pistorius was denied parole back in April on the basis that it was too early into his 13-year murder sentence. ENCA anchor Masego Rahlaga discussed this matter with Correctional Services spokesperson Singabaku Ngomalu.
Seems like the confusion was on the DCS's part. What was in dispute from your end when you said that it was too early for him to be considered back in April?
Good day, and thank you for having us. We can state that as a department, we were faced with a situation where we had multiple orders being issued by the Supreme Court of Appeal that we could not ignore. And we had to process those orders. And when inmate Oscar Pistorius then took the matter to the Constitutional Court, we also filed there, not opposing that application, but requesting that competent court in saying to them, can they assist in clarifying what needs to happen here? Because we're sitting with about 3 orders, all saying different things in terms of when we should start calculating the sentence date. And the Constitutional Court has clarified that part. Hence, we are now at a stage where we can take that order, give it to the parole board, affirming that Mr. Pistorius has reached the minimum detention period. Therefore, he is eligible, just like all other inmates, to be considered for parole placement.
Was any of it the confusion from what happened in the Supreme Court of Appeal judgment in November 2017?
The judgment was very clear in terms of the years that Mr. Pistorius needed to serve. But the confusion came in when it referred to when must we start counting his sentence, meaning the effective sentence date. You will recall that Mr. Pistorius came into our facilities for the first time to serve a sentence of culpable homicide. He was then placed out under correctional supervision, and then there were appeals. And when he was given 13 years and 5 months, he was brought back to then start again to serve that sentence.
Stay tuned to The Day That Was. More top stories and interviews right after the break. Welcome back to The Day That Was. I'm Daniela van Heerden. As part of our lunchtime update, our reporters have been out and about to bring you the latest on the day's top stories. ENCA anchor Masego Rahlaga touched base with Hloni Mthimkhulu in Johannesburg, Nobesuthu Hejana in Cape Town, and Pule Letshwiti Jones in Johannesburg.
How are residents saying they are coping without a basic right like this?
Yeah, Masego, so we went back to the community of Jan Hofmeyer in Brixton just to find out if, first of all, they had water from yesterday when we were there and when there were protests in that area, and also how they are getting along. And there has not been water supplied. And actually in the morning when we were there, there wasn't a water tanker in the area. There wasn't a water truck in the area. Some of the water tankers, they had been filled up, but there wasn't a truck in the area. And that truck arrives just after midday today. So, you know, there is this gap sometimes where in the morning there isn't a truck in the area that is able to fill, that they can fill from, and then they have to wait. And it's not a consistent sort of flow of where they can have trucks and fill their buckets.
I understand more than 25 African states are there. Why is this summit so important?
Well, Masego, we've heard from Mineral Minister Mr. Gwede Mantashe talking about the fact that South Africa needs renewable energy to address the energy crisis in the country, and talking about the fact that there was that discovery in Mpumalanga where they've signed a non-binding agreement with an Australian company to start working in Mpumalanga, and that is part of the plans to address the issues in the country, and also saying that also in Free State they've also cited or noted an area where natural gas could be extracted, and also saying that, I mean, offshores, I'm sure you would remember last year where he held a summit where he was hosting a number of groups as well as community members from those areas where they pretty much rely on small-scale fishing, where organizations were taking the government to court about their concerns regarding the environment.
Now, Public Works and Infrastructure Minister Sihle Zikalala reckons the extended public works program can be used to create about 5 million job opportunities. But can the program create permanent positions?
Well, the answer is simply no, Masego, and the minister has extensively elaborated in the sense that this is just a program that's looking at ensuring that it implements working opportunities and not permanent jobs. He's saying that with this program, they're hoping to equip young people with skills and ensuring that they then get absorbed into various working industries as well.
63 court cases in the Western Cape have been scrapped from the court due to police inefficiencies. This is according to the province's Court Watching Brief Unit, which monitored the success rate of reported cases once they land up in our courts during the first quarter of the financial year. The unit was launched to support the Police Oversight and Community Safety Department and identify inefficiencies in the judicial system. NCA reporter Kevin Brandt has more.
The Western Cape Court Watching Brief Unit monitors the success rate of prosecutions at 8 of the province's courts. Some of them include the ones in crime-ridden areas like Khayelitsha, Philippi and Bellville. Officials monitored cases from April to June this year.
Over the period that we are releasing the information on, we have noted over 21 police stations. There were 63 matters that were struck off the court roll. And those particular matters is deeply concerning because it affects people.
Reasons for these cases being scrapped range from dockets not being available and accused not being at court or dockets lacking enough details for the case to proceed. Of the cases that were thrown out of court, 26 relate to gender-based violence, 20 involved intent to do grievous bodily harm, and 10 were rape cases.
While we can't have devolution, we've shown through the safety plan, we've got a various ranges and categories of interventions, whether it be LEAP officers on the ground in the crime hotspots, or, for example, this specific tool, which is analyzing certain cases in those crime hotspots. So these 21 police stations that are monitored through the 8 courts, when there is an arrest, there needs to be an investigation, and there needs to be not just delayed justice, but there actually needs to be completion of the process.
The Western Cape's Police Oversight and Community Safety Department is in talks with the South African Police Service in a bid to have these cases re-enrolled.
This particular methodology has also been shared with other provinces following the Western Cape government's commitment to ensure that we can help and assist and strengthen the hand of the South African Police Service. We've always been clear that our court watching brief is there to help the South African Police Service.
Provincial government officials stress that the unit's purpose is to promote accountability in order to afford victims the justice they deserve. Kevin Brandt, Cape Town.
Some good and bad news from the Public Works and Infrastructure Department. Phase 5 of the expanded Public Works program will create more work opportunities and equip youths with entry-level work skills. But the department can't promise that permanent jobs will be created. Our reporter Pule Lechwiti-Jones has more.
Youth unemployment remains at a staggering 60.7% in the second quarter. The stats paint a bleak picture of the country's future. Government programs such as the Expanded Public Works program have created 3.9 million work opportunities from 2019 to date. But the jobs are only temporary. Youth unemployment remains a persistent challenge, and Public Works and Infrastructure Minister Sihle Zikalala says this must be addressed. But he admits it's a tough balancing act as skills development must be prioritized.
We would like to ensure that these job opportunities are converted into permanent employment. We are for decent employment. However, if you will take that approach, you may find that the opportunities will create, which can in some cases absorb number of people, will then be reduced to take few. So we must balance the two.
One program management analyst and researcher says EPWP won't be able to provide permanent jobs. He says there's a mismatch between the needs of the industry and the skills being created. This, he says, leads to structural unemployment.
Of course, when you look into the issue of young people, I think it's the biggest challenge in our country. And it's my view that EPWP alone cannot and would never be able to address these challenges that young people are experiencing. So you need that collective intervention from government, from the private sector, including NGOs to work with in this collectively to address this. EPWP alone, because I mean the economy is not performing well, and everything else that you are seeing is now being put on the program, and it could lead to a total collapse of the program because it becomes the only component that everyone is focusing on.
The indaba of Phase 5 of the EPWP program is expected to continue on Wednesday. Pule Lechwiti-Jones in Tshwane.
And that wraps this edition of The Day That Was. From myself and the team, thanks for watching. Until we meet again.